My name is Emily Carter, I'm 33 years old, and I've always believed that food is a love language. From the time I was a little girl in Ohio, the kitchen was where I felt most alive, where flavors and family came together. When I married into the Parker family, I thought my passion for cooking would help me win over my mother-in-law, Margaret Parker, a proud 65-year-old matriarch who had built her identity around being the perfect hostess. For 3 long years, I tried everything: lavish Sunday dinners, holiday spreads, even recreating recipes from Margaret's own childhood, to prove that I belonged in her family. But nothing was ever good enough. Every dish I made was too salty, too sweet, too plain, too much. And then came the night of her milestone birthday dinner, held in our own home, with 20 guests gathered around the table. I had spent weeks preparing the centerpiece dish, a braised beef bourguignon that I hoped would finally melt the ice between us. But just as the first plates were served, Margaret leaned back in her chair, wrinkled her nose, and with a cutting smile said, "This reminds me of the canned dog food my neighbor feeds her poodle." The room went silent. Every eye turned to me. My husband dropped his fork. I felt my entire body flush with humiliation. But this time I wasn't going to stay silent. Because what Margaret didn't know was that the dish she just mocked wasn't mine. And that secret would change everything. If you've ever dealt with an impossible in-law, you'll want to hear this story. Stick around and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a modest but warm middle-class home. My parents were both teachers, and though money was often tight, our table was always full. My grandmother, who lived just 2 streets away, was the one who taught me that cooking wasn't just about ingredients. It was about telling a story, carrying traditions forward. She showed me how to make her apple pie crust so flaky it shattered at the touch of a fork, and how to stir gravy until it gleamed like satin. By the time I was in high school, my friends joked that I didn't just make dinner. I curated experiences. When I went off to college, I studied counseling because I wanted to help people, but the kitchen always called me back. Cooking was my therapy, my sanctuary. So when I met James Parker at a 4th of July barbecue 6 years ago, it felt like fate. He was easygoing, an architect with kind eyes, and he lit up when he tasted the peach cobbler I brought. "If you ever open a restaurant," he grinned, "I'll be your first customer." But there was one person who didn't share his enthusiasm: his mother, Margaret. The first time I met her was at a Sunday dinner at her Grand Colonial house, just outside Cincinnati. She greeted me with a smile so thin it could have cut glass. "So," she said, scanning me from head to toe, "you're the new girlfriend. James tells me you're a school counselor. That must be draining. I always thought he'd marry someone a bit more ambitious." I tried to laugh it off, but her eyes told me it wasn't a joke. That dinner set the tone for everything that followed. Margaret's comments were never outright insults. They were daggers wrapped in silk. "This apartment is certainly cozy. I suppose it works for now. Counseling teenagers? My, that must be depressing. At least Heather had a real career." Heather, the name I came to dread. She was James's ex-girlfriend, a pharmaceutical rep with a polished resume, and a family that summered in Martha's Vineyard. Margaret brought her up constantly, as if Heather were still the benchmark for what a worthy Parker wife should be. I told myself I could win Margaret over if I just tried hard enough. I brought thoughtful gifts when we visited, researched wine she liked, even learned about opera just to make conversation. I adjusted my wardrobe to fit her conservative taste, wearing pearls instead of hoop earrings, navy instead of red. But no matter what I did, it was wrong. When James proposed to me after 2 years, Margaret's response was tepid at best. "Are you sure, James? You've only known each other 2 years. During our engagement, she inserted herself into every decision. She criticized the venue, rolled her eyes at my choice of flowers, and even arrived at our wedding in a pale champagne dress that looked suspiciously close to white. My mother leaned over during the ceremony and whispered, "She's daring you to make a scene." But I didn't. I smiled. For James, after the wedding, Margaret's presence in our lives only grew stronger. She insisted on weekly Sunday dinners at her house. And if we dared to miss one, she'd guilt-trip James with calls that lasted an hour. Sometimes she showed up at our apartment unannounced, letting herself in with the spare key James had given her years ago. Each visit was an opportunity for criticism. The way you fold James's shirts, it's not quite right. You should really dust more often. A clean home reflects a clear mind. And always, James grew up eating real food. His father was French, you know. We spent summers in Provence. His palate is very refined. I hope you can keep up. Cooking, the one place where I had always felt confident, became her favorite battlefield. One Thanksgiving, after I spent 3 days preparing a full spread, herb-roasted turkey, maple pecan sweet potatoes, cranberry sauce with orange zest, Margaret arrived at my door carrying her own turkey and side dishes. "I couldn't trust that you'd know how to make a proper Thanksgiving," she announced, bustling into my kitchen. James squeezed my hand under the table when I tried to protest. "Let's just get through today," he whispered. "It's not worth fighting." Christmas was worse. She handed me a small box with a thin smile. Inside was a voucher for cooking classes, since you clearly need them. Her other gifts to the family were extravagant: designer watches, spa packages, but to me, a pointed insult wrapped in paper. Over time, the subtle cruelty chipped away at me. Once, after a tense dinner where Margaret had spent the entire evening correcting my posture, my table settings, and even the way I served dessert, I locked myself in the bathroom just to breathe. That's when my sister-in-law, Clara, married to James's brother, quietly knocked on the door. "She does this to all of us at first," she whispered. "She called me Amanda for the first 2 years. My advice: never let her see you cry, and make sure James sees it when she's at her worst." But that was the problem. Margaret was clever. She saved her sharpest barbs for when James wasn't in the room. When confronted, she played the victim. "Oh, Emily, I was just trying to help. You're so sensitive." Her tactics left me doubting myself. Was I overreacting? Was I too thin-skinned? I began to dread family gatherings. My joy in cooking, once my pride, faded under the weight of her scrutiny. I'd stare at recipes for hours, second-guessing every ingredient. The final straw before the birthday incident came when James and I returned from our first anniversary trip to find that Margaret had used her spare key to redecorate our apartment. She replaced our curtains, rearranged our furniture, and filled our cabinets with what she called proper cookware. She left a note. "Couldn't bear to see James living this way." When I confronted James, he sighed. "She's just trying to help. The curtains are nicer, aren't they?" But it wasn't about curtains. It was about boundaries, about respect, and about the fact that the man I loved couldn't or wouldn't stand up to his mother. By the time Margaret's 65th birthday came around, I was exhausted from years of trying, failing, and hurting. Part of me wanted to give up, but another part whispered that maybe, just maybe, this milestone could be the turning point. If I could pull off the perfect party, if I could cook the perfect dish, perhaps she would finally see me as more than an outsider. I had no idea the night would instead change everything, just not in the way I expected. For most people, marriage is about building a life together. For me, it often felt like a test I had to pass. Every Sunday dinner, every holiday, every phone call, another exam where Margaret was the judge and I was doomed to fail. But I kept trying. During my second year of marriage, I enrolled in evening culinary classes at a local community college. Not because I didn't know how to cook, but because I thought if I could master French sauces and knife techniques, Margaret might finally take me seriously. I'd spend my days counseling troubled teenagers, listening to stories of abuse, neglect, and heartbreak, and then rush across town to spend 3 hours learning the difference between chiffonade and julienne. By the time I got home, it was nearly midnight, and James was already asleep. It was exhausting, but I told myself it was worth it. I remember one night, I proudly served James a perfect coq au vin, the recipe I had practiced in class all week. He loved it, praised it, said it tasted just like the dishes his father used to make. But when we brought leftovers to Sunday dinner, Margaret took one bite, dabbed her lips with a napkin, and said, "Not bad, but a little heavy-handed on the garlic." Pierre never used garlic in his coq au vin. It didn't matter what I did, it was never enough. Meanwhile, James's brother, Michael, and his wife Clara seemed to skate by without scrutiny. Clara worked part-time and often brought store-bought pies to family dinners. Margaret would coo over them as though they were works of art. "Oh, Clara, this crust is so flaky. Did you make it yourself?" Clara would blush and admit it was from the bakery on Main Street, but Margaret waved it off. "Still, you have such good taste." I wanted to scream. At work, I poured myself into my students. Counseling was draining, but I loved it. I stayed late helping kids fill out college applications, wrote recommendation letters, even bought prom dresses for 2 girls whose families couldn't afford them. I became the teacher students sought out when their world felt too heavy. And yet, at home, I felt invisible. James tried, in his quiet way, to reassure me. "Don't let her get to you," he'd say, kissing my forehead. But his refusal to confront her was its own wound. I carried the weight of every comment alone. One spring, I came down with pneumonia and had to take 2 weeks off work. Even then, Margaret found fault. She arrived at our apartment with soup and announced, "This wouldn't have happened if you took better care of yourself. James needs a strong wife, not one who falls apart every flu season." I lay in bed, sweating through fevers, while she reorganized my pantry and tooted about my housekeeping. Yet, despite all the hurt, I kept sacrificing pieces of myself to try and fit into her world. I canceled weekends with friends to attend her luncheons. I spent bonuses on gifts for her, scarves from boutiques, opera tickets, custom candles, only for them to be brushed aside with a "thank you, dear," before she turned to dote on someone else. The cruelest part was that my sacrifices weren't just about her approval, they were about James. I knew how much he loved his mother, how much he hated conflict. So I told myself I could endure it for him. That love meant patience, compromise, silence. But silence came at a cost. I began to lose myself. The confident girl who once baked pies with pride, who laughed with her grandmother over bubbling pots of soup, had been replaced by someone who second-guessed every move, every word. Even in my own kitchen, I felt Margaret's shadow looming over me. And yet, deep down, I still hoped that one day, all the sacrifices would add up to something. That she would finally look at me and say, "You're good enough." I didn't know it yet, but the birthday dinner looming on the horizon would not only shatter that illusion, it would force me to reclaim the pieces of myself I had given away for too long. Margaret's 65th birthday wasn't supposed to happen at our house. Originally, the plan was to celebrate at her country club, where she could parade her friends past the champagne fountain and revel in the compliments. But one evening, James came home and announced, "Mom thinks it would be more intimate if we hosted it here. Besides, we've got the biggest dining room." My stomach sank. Hosting Margaret's milestone birthday in our home meant every detail would be scrutinized. My cooking, my decorating, even the way I folded the napkins. Still, I forced a smile. Of course, it'll be special. In the weeks leading up to the party, Margaret called daily with instructions. The tablecloth should be lavender, not cream. The flowers must be lilies, no roses. The guest list ballooned from 10 to 20. And then the menu arrived in my inbox. 5 courses, complete with wine pairings. The centerpiece, she insisted, should be beef bourguignon. It was her late husband's favorite dish, and she made it clear it had to be done properly. So I practiced. For 3 weekends straight, I cooked the dish, tweaking the seasoning, the cooking time, the wine reduction. James taste-tested every version. "This is better than I remember Dad's," he said one night, licking his spoon clean. His confidence gave me hope. But hope is fragile. The day before the party, Margaret arrived uninvited, 3 hours early. She walked through the house, like an inspector with a clipboard. "The chairs should be angled differently. Are you really using those plates? And lavender napkins, did you iron them?" I gritted my teeth. "Yes, Margaret, they're ironed." She smirked as though unconvinced. That night, I barely slept, running through every possible scenario in my mind. The next morning, I woke early to start cooking. By 9 a.m., the vegetables were chopped, the beef cubes marinating, the stock simmering. I was in the middle of caramelizing onions when Margaret walked in, unannounced, her heels clicking like a metronome against the tile. "I thought you could use some help," she said, slipping on an apron without waiting for my reply. Her help quickly turned into sabotage. She criticized my knife skills, the quality of the wine, even the way I stir the pot. After an hour, I was desperate for air. I need to pick up the cake, I told her. The onions just need to caramelize slowly. Go, she said, waving me off. I'll take care of everything. When I returned 45 minutes later, the kitchen looked like a crime scene. My carefully prepped ingredients were gone. Margaret had thrown them out and started over. What happened to my bourguignon? I asked, horrified. It was all wrong, she replied flatly. The wine was too young, the beef cubes too big. I'm making it properly. I stood frozen, staring at the discarded vegetables and beef in the trash. Weeks of practice gone. For a moment, I wanted to scream, but instead, I swallowed my anger. Fine, you make the main course. I'll handle the rest. She looked almost triumphant, as if winning control of the dish was her victory. That evening, the guests began arriving. James's brother Michael and Clara, 3 of Margaret's sisters, old friends from her church group, even her neighbor, Mrs. Whitaker, who once called the cops because our lawn was too long. I smiled, welcomed them past appetizers. Outwardly, I was the gracious hostess. Inside, I was seething. The table was beautiful, lavender and silver decorations, lilies in crystal vases, candles glowing under the chandelier. For a moment, I let myself hope it might all go smoothly. But then came dinner. James and I carried out Margaret's bourguignon, ladling it into bowls. Margaret leaned back in her chair, her face aglow with satisfaction as everyone waited for her to take the first bite. She inhaled deeply, then wrinkled her nose. This smells familiar, she said coldly, like the canned dog food my neighbor buys for her poodle. The room fell silent. Forks clattered against plates. 20 sets of eyes turned to me. My cheeks burned with humiliation. But this time I was ready. Thanks for the feedback, I said evenly. But I didn't cook this. Confusion rippled through the table. Margaret blinked. What do you mean? You insisted on remaking the dish this morning, I explained, my voice calm. Threw out my ingredients. This is yours. A stunned hush fell. James looked at me, then at his mother, realization dawning. Clara covered her mouth, trying not to laugh. Margaret's face flushed crimson. That's ridiculous. I would never. But before she could finish, Michael spoke up. I called Emily this morning. She told me you'd taken over because you thought she was doing it wrong. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Margaret sputtered. I was only joking. Can't anyone here take a joke? No one believed her. And for the first time, everyone saw her cruelty laid bare. But then came plot twist number 1. As the awkward silence stretched, Mrs. Whitaker, the nosy neighbor, leaned forward. Funny, she said, because just last week I saw you at the butcher's, arguing with the clerk. You complained they didn't have the right cut of beef. You said, and I quote, you'd fix that girl's disaster yourself. The table erupted in whispers. Margaret's alibi crumbled before her eyes. Her hand trembled as she set down her spoon. Enough, James said, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard. This has gone on for years, Mom. The constant criticism, the insults. Tonight was the last straw. The room froze. James had never confronted her like this. Not once. Margaret's lip quivered. She opened her mouth to retort, but before she could, Clara added quietly, It's not just Emily. You did this to me too. For years. You call it help, but it's cruelty. All eyes turned back to Margaret. For the first time, she was outnumbered. The evening limped forward. Guests forced small talk, complimented my side dishes, avoided Margaret's gaze. But the damage was done. When dessert came, a towering 3-tiered cake with sugar lilies, I saw Margaret watching me with an unreadable expression. And then, quietly, almost too soft to hear, she muttered, Maybe you're not as hopeless as I thought. It wasn't a compliment. It was a crack in the armor. Later, as guests left with awkward goodbyes, James closed the door and leaned against it, exhausted. I can't believe she did that, he whispered. But just when I thought the night was over, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She's not done with you. Be careful. I stared at the screen, heart racing. That was plot twist number 2. Because someone at that table, someone in Margaret's circle, was warning me that this battle wasn't finished. That night, after the last dish was scrubbed and the candles blown out, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. James had gone upstairs, exhausted by the confrontation with his mother. But I couldn't move. I sat staring at my phone, the anonymous text still glowing on the screen. "She's not done with you. Be careful." My pulse pounded in my ears. The humiliation of the dinner replayed in my head, like a cruel film reel. Margaret's smirk, her words comparing the meal to dog food. The heat of everyone's eyes on me. The silence that felt like a noose. Except this time, the shame wasn't just hers to wield. Everyone had seen the truth. Everyone had seen her cruelty. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. Because humiliation doesn't vanish when the truth is revealed. It lingers. It clings. And in the quiet of the night, I replayed every jab she'd ever made. Every time I'd laughed off. Every moment I'd swallowed my pain to keep the peace. My chest tightened as if years of suppressed tears had finally found their way to the surface. I buried my face in my hands and sobbed. Not delicate tears, but wrenching, raw sobs that shook my whole body. I cried for the little girl who once believed cooking was love, for the young woman who believed effort could buy acceptance, for the wife who thought silence was strength. When James came down an hour later, he froze in the doorway. "Emily," his voice broke. I looked up, my eyes swollen, my cheeks streaked with tears. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to be compared to dog food in front of your whole family? Do you?" He stepped closer, but I held up my hand. "Don't. Just listen." My voice trembled, but I forced the words out. "I've spent 3 years sacrificing myself to make her happy. I gave up weekends, sleep, friends, even pieces of myself. And for what? For her to humiliate me in her home." James's shoulders slumped. "I know. I should have stopped her years ago." "That's not enough," I whispered. "Knowing isn't enough. I needed you to see me, to stand beside me. And tonight, for the first time, you did. But where was that 3 years ago, James? Where was it when I was crying in the bathroom after dinners? Where was it when she barged into our house with her own turkey? When she redecorated our apartment?" He sat down across from me, his hands trembling as he reached for mine. I was a coward. I thought avoiding conflict would keep the peace, but all it did was destroy yours. I pull my hands back, unable to let go of the storm in my chest. I feel like I've been screaming into a void, like I've been invisible in my own marriage. The silence that followed was heavier than any insult Margaret had ever thrown. Upstairs, I could hear the faint creak of the house settling, the echo of a clock ticking in the living room, and I realized, for the first time, how utterly alone I had felt all these years. The text on my phone buzzed again. Another message. "She'll never let you in. Watch your back." I didn't know if it was meant as a warning or a threat, but it made my chest tighten with fear. Because humiliation was one thing, but a vendetta? That was something else entirely. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to James's steady breathing beside me. I wasn't just angry at Margaret anymore. I was furious with myself for letting her break me down, for letting James's silence excuse it, for sacrificing so much of my joy. And beneath the fury was something sharper, more dangerous, resolve. Because I finally understood that this wasn't just about cooking or family dinners, or even approval. This was about survival. About reclaiming the pieces of myself I had lost. Margaret wanted me small, humiliated, defeated, but I was done being her victim. And if she wasn't finished with me, then she had no idea what I was capable of. The next morning, the air in her home felt different. James moved quietly, almost cautiously, as if afraid to disturb whatever storm was still brewing inside me. He brewed coffee, buttered toast, set it in front of me. I barely touched it. My eyes kept drifting to the phone on the counter. The anonymous warning message burned into my mind. "She's not done with you." At first, I thought it was paranoia. But then 2 days later, I received an email from the school district's HR office. Someone had lodged an anonymous complaint about me, accusing me of being unprofessional with students. The claims were absurd, But the timing? Too sharp to be coincidence. I printed the email, slid it across the table to James that evening. This is her. His face drained of color. Emily, that's serious. If she won't win. I cut him off, my voice steady for the first time in days. I'm done being her target. It's time she learns I'm not afraid of her anymore. For years, I had tried kindness. I had tried patience. I had tried silence. None of it worked. So this time, I decided to fight fire with truth. The next Sunday, instead of dreading dinner at Margaret's, I prepared. I gathered every text, every voicemail where she undermined me. I printed the emails she had sent James criticizing my career, the backhanded messages she thought I'd never see. And when we arrived at her house, I carried a folder as carefully as if it were a weapon. Dinner started as usual, with Margaret holding court at the head of the table, her voice sugary as she told her sisters how her birthday was lovely, despite a few hiccups. She looked at me as she said it, her smile sharp as glass. Halfway through the meal I stood. I'd like to say something. The room quieted. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me. James shifted uncomfortably, but I pressed on. For 3 years, I've tried to earn a place at this table. I've cooked, I've hosted, I've bent myself into shapes I don't recognize, all for approval I never received. But last week, something happened that changed everything. Margaret insulted a dish she made herself and blamed me. And for the first time, everyone saw what I've lived through since the day I met her. Margaret's smile faltered. Emily, really, must we? Yes. I snapped, my voice louder than I'd intended. We must, because it didn't stop there. Someone sent me threatening messages afterward. And then, an anonymous complaint landed at my job. Gasps rippled around the table. Michael's wife, Clara, set down her fork with a clatter. Are you serious? James looked at his mother. Mom, please tell me you had nothing to do with this. Margaret flushed. Of course not. How dare you even? I pulled out the folder and spread the evidence across the table. Her critical texts, her emails, proof of her attempts to sabotage me. The room grew so quiet I could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. You wanted me humiliated, I said, my voice steady. But tonight, the truth belongs to everyone. Margaret's sisters exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, Aunt Linda, cleared her throat. Margaret, this is cruel. I knew you could be sharp, but this? Emily is family. Margaret's face twisted. Family? She's taken my son, my home, my traditions. No, James said, his voice breaking as he finally stood beside me. She's my wife, and the only person tearing this family apart is you. For a moment, Margaret looked small, cornered, but then, in a twist I hadn't expected, she turned her anger not on me, but on Clara. You think you're innocent? She spat. You complained about me behind my back for years. Don't think I don't know. The table erupted into chaos, voices overlapping, accusations flying. Years of silence cracked open, spilling decades of resentment. And then came the second twist. Margaret's neighbor, Mrs. Whitaker, the one who had exposed her at the party, rose from her seat. Enough, she said sharply. The room stilled. Margaret, you asked me to help file that complaint against Emily. You told me she was unfit for her job, that she didn't deserve James. Well, I won't lie for you anymore. Gasps filled the room. Margaret's jaw dropped. You traitor, she hissed. But the damage was done. Her own ally had turned against her. I should have felt triumphant. And in a way I did. But mostly I felt free. Because the truth was out. Everyone had seen it. Everyone finally understood. Margaret, for once, had nothing left to say. She sank into her chair, her face pale, her body rigid. That night, when James and I left, Clara hugged me tightly. You were brave, she whispered. You did what I never could. As we drove home, James reached for my hand. I'm sorry, he said softly. For all the years I let you face this alone. But tonight, you were incredible. I looked out the window at the passing streetlights, a strange calm settling over me. This wasn't about revenge, I said quietly. It was about reclaiming myself. And I'm done giving her the power to define me. In the weeks that followed, the storm slowly settled. Margaret's voice, once so dominant in every room, grew quieter. Whether from shame or reflection, I'll never know. But for the first time, Sunday dinners were different. Not perfect, not painless, but no longer poisoned by constant humiliation. As for me, I found something far greater than her approval. I found my own voice. I discovered that silence isn't peace, it's surrender. And when you finally stand tall, when you speak your truth, you realize that no one, no mother-in-law, no critic, no manipulator, can take your worth away from you. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent or spoken out the way I finally did? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story.